Okay, so hopefully we are all set, and right now I'm going to discuss a very important annotation called SessionAttributes. Obviously, I know you got the foundation, you got the fundamental in the last video. So if you are very new to this particular annotation, then you can see my last video on this annotation, right? That was pretty straightforward video, and there is nothing critical right there. But I want to specifically talk about this particular annotation for some time. Why? Because this is a very tricky annotation, and if you do not understand it properly, you will end up writing a lot of bugs. Okay, and tracking those bugs will be very difficult in a real-time project. So what I want is you just give me some time to explain you about this particular annotation. And what I want to do right now, I have created a very different project here called Spring Love Calculator Session Attribute. The reason why I've created a different project here, because I want to keep this thing separate, and I want to specifically give you information about this particular annotation. Trust me guys, spend some time right now on this annotation and you will be finding it very helpful whenever you're going to work in a real-time project. Okay, so let's get started. So right now I have a very simple project here called Spring Love Calculator Session Attribute, and basically right now what I want to do, I have created a controller here. This is a very simple controller. I have just written it to save some time, and you can see I have a controller called first controller, and I have a request mapping here, and I have a handler method here. My handler method name is handling method 1, and it is returning a page called index. Okay, and the URL which is mapped to this particular handler method is called /first. Okay, so what about this particular page? So if I'll do Command Shift R, and if I'll go to this index.jsp page, you can see I have just given a header here, and that's it. Okay, so it's a pretty simple controller. Just want to save some time. That's why I have written this earlier. Cool. So right now what I want to do, I want to run this particular project, and then I'm going to get started with the annotation called SessionAttributes. Cool. So right now let's run this on server. So right now, let me hit the URL. So my URL was /first, right? So I'll do /first here. Let me see if I can access the page. Yes, session attribute examples. Let me change it to session attributes, because we are going to talk about session attribute. Okay, we are talking about that particular annotation. So hopefully it makes sense right now. Cool. So right now, guys, before I go ahead and before I talk about session attributes, tell me, what do you mean by a request scope? Probably I have discussed about this request scope in the last video. So what do you basically understand when I say request scope? So a request scope is very simple, guys. Think like, you are opening your browser, you are hitting a URL. Okay, once you hit the URL, the request goes to the server handles the request, and then it sends a response back, right? And this sending the request, getting the response back, this time is called request scope. Okay, so what I mean by that, let's say if I'm copying this URL, Command C, and if I'll open a incognito window, and right here, let me maximize this. Let's say right now, if I will open the developer tool, let me open the developer tool as well. Cool. So I will go to network. Now let me paste this URL. Okay, so let me do enter right now. So you can see I have given a request. That request, this Spring Love Calculator /first, this request goes to the server. Okay, you can see this particular request. If you put your cursor here, you can see Spring Love Calculator /first. This is my request, and this is the response I got. You can see under response, I'm getting this thing. This is my HTML, and I'm getting this HTML as a response, right? And this is what we call a request scope. We're sending the request, getting the response back. That is one request scope. Let's say if I refresh, okay, I'm getting the same page. Obviously, I hit the same URL. I got the same page. This is called one request scope. Okay, so right now, let me do what? As you guys understood the request scope, now let me show you a slide right now so that I can slowly go to the topic. And hopefully you guys are so excited because I'm pretty much excited about this topic. Okay, so right now, let's say I have two area. Okay, this yellow one, I will say it as request scope, and the blue one, I will call it as session scope. Okay, obviously the session scope is wider than the request scope. Okay, why? Let me explain you that. Imagine that we have a controller, let's say class controller, and I have annotated with addController annotation. Right now, I have a handler method. This controller is called handler, right? Inside this handler, I have a handler method. Let's say the method name is M1, and this M1 is mapped to /ABC. And inside this M1, I am accepting a model. Okay, so if I'm writing model M1 means Spring is going to create the model object for me. And now imagine that with this M1, I am adding obj1, which is my key, and then an object. You can add any object here. I have added object 1. Imagine that there is an imaginary object that I have added to the model. And then I am sending view.jsp as a response to the user. Okay, so whenever the user will enter /ABC, he'll get view.jsp as a response. Pretty cool. Nothing challenging here. Pretty understandable, right? So my question is, whenever we will get a request called /ABC, whenever the user is going to enter this URL, then obviously a model object is going to be created, right? Because we have written model here. So model is also part of a request scope. Okay, once I get a request, okay, then the model object get created. If I want to send something to view, then I will add those things to the model and I will send those model to my view, and this view is going to be appear in my user screen. And all these things is part of a request scope, and the model is also part of the request scope. So what I mean by that is, whenever we'll be getting this request /ABC, we are adding this obj1 or this object1 to my model. That means inside this request scope, I will have this object1, correct? Because the model is part of a request scope. So imagine that this object1 is inside the model. So to simplify that, I'm just saying object1 right here. I'm adding this object1 to my model, so this object1 will be there inside the request scope. Pretty simple. And once I have handled this particular URL, and once I sent this view.jsp to my user screen, once my request scope is done, this particular object1 will be destroyed from the request scope. Obviously, model is part of the request scope. So whenever model will be destroyed, the object1 will also be destroyed, right? Because model is there inside the request, all right? Request scope is over, so that object got destroyed. Cool. Pretty easy to understand, right? Okay, so to make you understand this, okay, so what I'll do, let me go back to my screen because I don't want to rush. Let's make it very clear. Okay, so let me switch to my STS. Okay, so now let me go to my first controller, and here inside this handling method, I am going to create a model object. So I'll say model and model here. Okay, let me remove this MO from here. Okay, I have created a model object, and let me say I want to add a few things to my model. Let's say model dot add attribute, and let me say first name, and let's say attribute value is Abhilash. And similarly, let me copy this line and let me say last name, and let me say Panigrahi. Okay, so cool. So I have added two things to my model, and I'm sending all this data to my index page. So let me go to my index page and let me access those things. To access those things, it is pretty simple. I'll say first name, and I will simply put my model name right here. Okay, so what is my model name? First name. Let me copy this. I'll be getting this data in my view because that's what model does, is just send my data to my view page. So right now first name, and similarly I'll copy this and I'll paste it and I'll say last name. Cool. So obviously right now, as I'm sending Avilas and Panigrahi as first name and last name, I'll be getting those data in the index.jsp page. This is pretty simple, nothing to explain here. You guys already know about it. But the thing that I want to discuss right here, imagine that I have another handler method right here. Let me do copy paste and let me say request mapping, and here let me say second. Okay, this is going to my second request, and let me say handling method 2, and let me do what? Tell me one thing. If I want, let me comment this thing. Okay, let me comment this thing as well. Just tell me one thing. Whatever the things that we have discussed so far about the request scope, utilize that knowledge and just tell me. This is obviously a new model object. If you are getting confused, let me say model 1, and let me say model 1 dot get attribute, and let me try to access this first name here. Okay, so will I be getting this first name, whatever the value I have set here of Vilas, right here? Can I get string first name equal to this one? Let me cast this to string because this get attribute is going to return me an object. There you go. And let me log this one, sys out, and let me say first name. Okay, so tell me one thing, will I be getting this first name value right here? So obviously the answer is whenever I'm hitting /first, that is one request scope, once the index page is returned, I will be getting this model stuff right there in my JSP page, and my request scope is over. And right now, next time whenever I'm hitting /second, this is a new request, right? If it is a new request, that means it is a new request scope, and model are the part of the request scope. And if it is a new request scope, there is no way I will be getting the first name right here in the line number 22, because that model was different and this model object is different. Okay, so let me do command S. Okay, this last second I'll do what? I'll create a link here. Let me go to my index.jsp and let me say anchor, and let me say href, and let me say next, and let me give the URL. So what is the URL? /spring love calculator. Let me copy this, command C, I'll go here, I'll do command V, and what is the URL which is getting fired after the first page? In this page, whenever I'll show the index, I will give a link to this particular page. This is /second. So I'll do what? I'll give /second here, and there you go. Let me do command S, and let me wait till my server reload the changes. Okay, so my changes has been deployed to the server. Now let me go to my browser and let me hit this URL /first, which is basically the request mapping for this handling method 1, this particular method, right? So obviously right now a model object will be created. All these values, first name and last name, will be added to the model. It will go to the view, and in the view we will be definitely getting those things right here inside our web page, right? So let me do enter, and obviously first name is Vilas, last name is Panigrahi, and obviously there is a next link. And if I'll click on this next link, what is the next link? The next link is obviously /second, and inside the /second we are trying to fetch the model attribute called first name, but the point is this model attribute we have set inside this method, inside the handling method 1. So obviously this model is not for this particular method, so obviously it will be returning null because this model 1 object is different and it doesn't have an attribute called first name. So let me check whether I'm getting this or not. Okay, so let me go to the web page and let me click on next, so that /second will be get fired, and you can obviously see that it is showing me null here, and obviously the first name is blank and the last name is blank. Let me give a break here. BR/ and let me copy this, paste it here, and there you go. Okay, so just to resize the things and see this, you can see we are not getting this value, and also whenever we're trying to log the things, we are getting null here, right? 2 times null because we have refreshed the page, right? So this is pretty obvious and nothing fancy here. Till now you must be scolding me that why I am telling you all these things if you already know these things, right? Because I want everyone to be in the same page. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's see the new thing right here. Let me go to my slide. Now this is the same example. We have a controller class and we have a method called M1, and this M1 method is basically having a model object, and we are adding object 1 right here to the model. So as this object 1 is there inside the M1, which is my model object, obviously there will be object created right here inside the request scope whenever this particular URL somebody is going to hit. Okay, but the point is right now I am going to add a new annotation here called add session attributes, and I am going to say obj1. So obj1 is the key. Okay, this is the key, this key particularly holding this particular object called object1, and right now I am placing this obj1 inside the session attributes. So what does it really mean? What it means that right now this particular model object called obj1 is going to be persisted into the session. Okay, so as I said, we have 2 types of scope. One is request scope, one is session scope. Right now when somebody is going to hit this URL /abc, what is going to happen is a model object will be created. The model object is part of a request scope, and obviously we are adding object 1 to our model. So object 1 will go to the request scope, right? And then the Spring MVC is going to see there is a add session attributes here. So if there is a add session attributes here and it is having obj1 right here, which is pointing to this object, what it is going to do, it is also going to create a new object, or it is going to create an object here also inside the session scope, right? So we have a object 1 which is part of the request scope as it is part of the model, and also it is there inside the session scope as well. Right? So the point is, once this particular handler method /abc, once this particular request is completed, once the user get back the response, which is view.jsp, what is going to happen is this object 1 will be. So the whole point of this conversation is, once this particular method is going to be invoked and it is completed, this object 1 will be removed from the request scope. But this object 1 right here, which is already there inside the session scope, will be still there. And this object 1, which is there inside the session scope, is going to be available to all the controllers that we have in our Spring MVC application. And this sentence is quite controversial, and I am going to come back to this particular thing. But whatever the takeaway you have taken from this particular slide is, once this particular request mapping, this particular method is completed, this object 1 will be destroyed, because this is a model object and the model is part of the request scope, and obviously once the request scope is over, the model will be destroyed, and obviously whatever the attributes there inside the model, that will be removed. Cool. So right now let me show you another slide here. Okay, so imagine the controller class and it has a add controller. Right now we have a request mapping /abc. We have a model object here M1, and we are adding 2 objects. Okay, right now we are adding 2 different objects to our model. Okay, obj1, which is object 1, obj2, which is object 2. Pretty nice. And we are returning view.jsp as a response. So what will happen? Obviously right now object 1 will be there inside the request scope, object 2 will be there inside the request scope. But right now we also have a session attributes annotation right here, which has obj1 as is this is there inside the parameter. So right now what is going to happen, this obj1 points to the object 1, so this object 1 will be there inside the session scope. Okay, and once this particular method invocation is done, once this /abc URL has been handled, this obj1 and obj2 will be destroyed from the request scope, but the obj1 will be still there in the session scope because we have this obj1 there inside the session attributes annotation. Okay, pretty simple. Right now I have a task for you, and here the story began. Okay, so right now just imagine that we have another handler method inside the same controller. Inside the controller class controller, we have this particular method right now which is handling another URL called /bbb. Okay, so whenever I will be getting this request, this particular method will be get called, and also it has a new model. So a new model object will be created, and if we want to store any data or we want to do something, we can do that using this M2. But the interesting thing is that this particular method is part of this controller, and this controller has a session attribute right here called obj1. So obj1 is obviously the object one, and this is there inside the session scope. So right now, as this particular method is part of the same controller, whenever we will have this /bbb request, so what Spring MVC is going to do, whenever the request comes to this particular method, it is simply going to push this obj1 to the request scope. So if we want, we can access this object 1 right now inside this model 2. Okay, inside this method 2 using this model M2. Okay, confusing? I believe not confusing, because we are going to do it inside the code right now. Okay, so one more thing is that if right now I'm going to say m2.getAttribute obj1, I will get this object 1 right now. And that is the interesting thing. And we are going to prove this right now with our code. We have already written the code, so let's do it. But just remember that once this /bbb request is completed, and once this view1.jsp has been given back to the user, this obj1 will be removed from the request scope, but it is still there inside the session scope. If we have another method here, let's say method 3, then obviously again, when that particular method will be executed, when that particular method will handle a request, again this obj1 will push to the request scope. Why? Because we have the session attributes right here, and a Spring MVC or the Spring developer has designed this session attributes for that purpose, right? I'm going to come back to this particular point, but let's first prove this particular point here with coding, because I love coding. Okay, all this theory are nonsense if I cannot prove it. So let's go ahead and let's prove it. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's do some changes to my first controller right here. Okay, so right now here I was actually trying to access the first name from my model 1. Okay, from this model object I'm trying to access the first name, but previously it was giving me null, I believe. Right now let's do some magic here. Okay, let me give session attribute right here. Sorry, session attributes, and here let me persist this first name. Okay, so you can see this model, and in this model we are adding two objects here, first name and last name, which is Avilas and Panigrai. Obviously these are string objects, so let me copy the first name to here. Okay, so right now the first name, you can see this model object first name will be persisted right now to the session. You just imagine that two area, the request scope and the session scope. Right now this first name is there inside the request scope also, and also in the session scope. Once the request scope is done, it is there inside the session scope. As this /second, as this particular method is inside the same controller, whenever the /second URL we are going to handle inside the request scope itself, the first name is going to be available, so that we can access right now the first name from our this particular model object, because this model is part of the request scope, and whenever this particular model will be created, the Spring MVC will make this first name available inside this model object, right? So if it is true, then I'll be getting the first name right here inside my handling method too, right? Anyhow, I'm sending the user to the same page, index page. So what I'll do right now, the link is also there, right? Cool. So now let me do Command S. So server will reload the changes, and we will see this amazing kind of annotation right here, which is session attribute. Isn't it amazing? This is nothing, we are going to see a lot of things. Cool. I do not know, but today I am not able to talk. What is happening? COVID? No, man. I'm pretty scared of that. Not COVID. Cool. So it's completed, right? So what I'm going to do right now, I will go here. I'll go to the first one. Let me say /first. So I'll get Avilas and Panigraj because two of the things I have added to my model. So nothing fancy here. I'll be getting these things inside the index page. Right now, I will go to the indexer.jsp. Okay, sorry, here, and I'll click next. And my goal here right now, I should get Avilas in the console because of this particular line. Okay, so let me do next right now. And there you go. Avilas. Got the concept? Got the concept? Remember, pause. Do whatever you want to do. But you need to understand this. This Avilas I am getting through the model object, not from the session object, from the model. This model is there inside my request scope. Okay? You know the whole story, right? Cool. But what about this Avilas? Okay? This Avilas, I'm getting it from the request scope or the model, or I'm getting it from the session. Okay? Imagine that. Two area, one area for the request scope, one area for the session scope. Okay, this one I'm getting from the request or session. Okay, so before you answer me this question, I want to simplify things for you guys. So you can see a lot of screenshots here, in front of your screen. So don't worry, just concentrate here right now. So this is the controller class of our is called the first controller. So right now inside the /first request, whenever this particular handler method is getting called, so basically we are putting the first name inside the model. Inside our model, we are adding the first name, which is Avilas, and also we are using the @session attribute right here and putting the first name, which is my model attribute right here inside the session. Okay, cool. So as per the rule, whenever the /second is getting invoked, whenever this particular method is getting invoked, this first name is pushed to the request scope from the session scope. You can see here a diagram. Whenever the /second is getting invoked, this first name is already there in the session. That's because we have the session attribute right here. But whenever the /second is going to invoke, right, this particular object from the session scope is going to be pushed to the request scope. And that's why you can see we have also the first name here inside the request. That's because it's pushed from the session scope, and that's why inside this model right now we have the first name available. And that's why inside this model, whenever I'm doing model1.get attribute of first name, I am able to get the first name right here inside the first name. And whenever I'm trying to log it, I am getting Avilas here, right, as a output. You have already seen that, whenever I have executed the program. Okay, but the question is, let's say right now, what is the work of a model, right? So inside the model right now, this first name is available. So right now this model will go to the index page, which is my view. The model will go there from my controller to view. And whenever I'm saying here first name, okay, whenever I'm trying to paste the first name here, so from where it is getting the value, from the model or from the session. Right now this first name is inside the model, and is also inside the session. You can see the first name object is inside the request scope, and basically think like we have a model object just like this, and inside this model object this first name object is there, right? So right now this first name is also available inside the session. Cool. So right now the question is, whenever I'm doing first name here, from where it is going to fetch the value, from the model or from the session? And the answer is pretty simple. Whenever we work with JSP, let's say this first name is available both inside the request and the session, the first priority will go to the request. So the first name here, as it is available inside the model or inside the request, this is going to be retrieved from here. Okay, the first name is going to be retrieved from the request. And imagine if this first name is not available inside the request, then it is going to be retrieved from the session. That's the rule. Okay, so before JSP is going to fetch the data here, it is going to check whether this first name is available inside the model. If yes, then get it from there. And in our case, we have already proved it right here inside the controller. Whenever we are trying to log this first name, fetching it from the model, we are able to get the value right here. Okay, we are getting the value of Vilas inside our console as we have experienced it previously. So this first name is available inside this model object, and that's why this first name, whenever we are fetching it, we will be getting the first name from the request or from the model, and this Avilas basically we are getting it from the model, or we can say we can getting it from the request. Whatever you want to say it, just say it. But I hope that you understand that from where we are fetching this Avilas. Okay. The concept that I have given you, okay, whenever we use the add session attribute, the objects that we are putting inside the add session attribute, all those objects will be available inside the request, okay, inside the request. And that's the only thing that you need to understand. Just like here, this first name is available inside the request, this first name is also available inside the session. And the best way to prove it, if we are going to use your JSP request scope and the session scope object, let me show that to you so that you guys also be confirmed and you will not be having any doubt that from where this first name is going to be fetched. Okay, so basically let me switch to my Eclipse. So right now, as you can see, this first name is there inside the session. Okay, so it is going to be available inside this model. Okay, and this model is going to the index page, and right now if I'll go to this index page right here, I'm going to write two different lines here. Okay, I'm going to write two different line just to prove that how things works, right? So what I'm going to do here, let me say first name value fetching from the request. Okay, so let's see whether the first name is available inside the request or not. So to do that, what I'm going to do here, let me copy my attribute name, which is first name. Let me command C this, command V it right here. And right now, let's see, let me search this first name from the request scope. So request scope is the object. JSP provide this particular object free of cost. So we can see that this first name value is there inside the request. Okay, if it is there inside the request, then this first name value will be appear here. Okay, and right after that, I am going to give you a BR right here, and I am going to copy the same line. I can do command C, and I am going to do command V here, and I can say first name value fetching from the session, right? Session. Okay, and let me write here session scope dot first name. Okay, so the first name value I am fetching from the session scope right here, and also the first name value I'm trying to fetch it from the request scope right here. Okay, so if I go with that particular diagram, I can see the first name is available inside the request, and also the first name is available inside the session. So let's prove it. There are two different objects which is present inside the request and also inside the session. And to prove that, I will go to my STS. So to prove that, let me access this index.jsp page. So I will go to my web page right here, and I am going to fire the /first. And as you can see, when the slash first is getting executed, we are getting Abhilash Panikrai right here, nothing fancy. So if I'll go here, nothing fancy here, we are just adding the Abhilash and Panikrai to the first name and last name, and we're sending that model object, this particular model object, to the index. So inside the index page, this first name will be retrieved from the model, and the last name also will be retrieved from the model. That's because if you see here inside the first controller, we are adding to the model first, and also we are putting this first name inside the session. So the first name will be also inside the session as well. So if I can see here, the first name value is available inside the request, which is Abhilash, and the first name value which is fetching from the session, that is also Abhilash. Okay. So right now, whenever I hit next, okay, now the slash second will be get fired. I'm getting Abhilash here because I'm trying to log it by fetching it from the model. And also you can see the first name value fetching from the request is Abhilash, and the first name value fetching from the session is also Abhilash. So this first name is available both inside the request and in the session. Okay, and I told you that if the first name will be available both inside the request and the session, as you can see, the first name is available both inside the request scope and the session scope. So the JSP will give the priority to the request scope, and it is going to fetch the first name from the request, and in this case it is going to fetch the first name from the model. Okay, cool. Hopefully you got the clarity right now. I will go here. I will just remove the comments from here, and I'll say model1.add attributes, first name. I will not hardcode it. I will remove the hardcode from here. I'll copy this first name, paste the first name right here. Okay, and simply I'll do one more thing for the last name also. I don't want to hardcode. Let me get the thing just like this. Let me copy this and let me paste it right here. And let me give some white spaces so that you can see everything on one screen. And now let me say last name, and the get attribute. What is the attribute I have set in the first model is the last name. Copy this, paste it here, last name. I'll be getting my last name here. Also, I want to log it. Let me log it right here. Also, right now I want to add it, add the last name, whatever I fetched from here. Let me add it right here to my model also, right? When I'll be clicking this particular link, so this particular method will be executed, and as we have the add session attribute which has first name only, so we'll be only getting the first name right here. The last name we will not able to retrieve because the last name is not added to the session attribute. So obviously the last name will return null. Okay, so let's check this out whether it is returning null or not, because the last name, this particular object, we have not persisted inside the session attribute. So obviously the last name will not be there. So if I'll try to access the last name right here inside this particular handler method, then obviously I'll not be getting it. Cool. So right now let me try this. Let me go here. Let me hit the first link first here, enter. Abhilash Panikrai, this is the first request, no problem. Next, we'll be getting only Abhilash. You can see also the model, we are getting Abhilash here. And right now, this is not the session attribute. This is the model attribute. We are getting this Abhilash from the model attribute. Why? Because right now we are setting this. We are fetching it right here, and we are setting the model right here. So right here in the index.jsp, this is fetching from my model attribute. Right now, what I'm gonna do, I'll go to my first controller, and right here in the first name, I will add this last name also to here to the session attribute, and I will wrap this off with a curly braces, and I'll do Command S to save everything. So right now both my first name and last name will be persisted to the session. So all these two things will available in this handling method as well, and I'll be fetching all these things, and I will be once I fetch them, I am setting all these things to my model, and these things I'm sending it to my view, and obviously I will be getting that in my view. So let me go here and let me again hit first here. Okay, Abhilash Panigrahi. Next I'll be getting Abhilash and Panigrahi, and you can see I've also added the log for that. I'm getting both Abhilash and Panigrahi right here whenever I am actually handling the /second request. Okay, so this is a very important thing, and hopefully you understand this. Okay, all right, hold on. Now just tell me, do I really need to add the first name and the last name object to my model1 object explicitly by using model1.addAttribute first name, model1.addAttribute last name? I'll tell you what, these two lines are useless. I should not write these two lines. If I will also not write these two lines, the first name and the last name will be available in my index page and in my request scope. Why? Let me explain you that. Here you can see I am getting my first name object from the model. From the request, I am trying to get the first name object, and I am trying to log the first name in the console by doing system.out.println of first name. And here also we are trying to log the last name by fetching it from the model. You can see model.getAttribute of last name. I'm trying to get the attribute from the last name. Okay, and once I get that, I am trying to log that in my console by doing a system.out.println of last name. So if both my first name and last name I'm able to get it from the model, and if I'm able to log it in the console, that does mean that the first name and the last name is available inside the model object. Yes, it is available inside the model object. That's why I'm able to get it by doing model1.getAttribute. So if the first name and last name is already there inside the model attribute, there is no need to add them again by doing model.addAttribute first name, model.addAttribute last name. There is no need to do that. Okay, because these attributes are already available inside my model object. So whenever you are practicing, do not write these two lines, the model1 add attribute of first name, model1 add attribute of last name. Do not add these two lines inside your program, because Spring is going to take care of it by itself, and it is going to push the first name and the last name objects to your model automatically. So basically you don't need to do anything. Inside your model object, already the value, the first name and the last name values are available, and the values will be transferred to the index page automatically by the Spring. So inside your JSP page, whenever you are going to do first name and the last name, whenever you are trying to log it, this value will be fetched from the request or from the model if it is available. So explicitly, you do not need to set these two lines, you do not need to write these two lines in your code. Right now the question is, then why you are writing it explicitly? If it is not needed, if it is not required, then why you are writing it, correct? Well, I want to visualize the thing, and I want to make you guys realize that, in our JSP page, we are fetching the first name and the last name from the model. From the request only we are fetching the first name and the last name, not from the session. That's why explicitly I am again adding the first name and the last name to my model object before transferring it to my index page or to my view. Hopefully this makes sense. So in this tutorial, I'll be keep adding the first name and the last name to the model by using model.addAttributes just to visualize the things, but it is not needed. This is useless code, and whenever you are practicing, do not even write these two lines of code. Cool. So I'll go to my first controller right now. Imagine that right now I have another So I'll do what? I will copy this and I will paste it right here, and I'll say this third, and I'll say handling method 3, and this doesn't matter, but let me change this to model 2 or model 3, something like that. Let me remove all these things right now. Okay, let's say in this method I want to do what? I have only one requirement. I want to get model2 dot get attribute, and I only want to get the last name. Okay, so I'll say last name. So obviously I'll be getting that last name because from the model, because obviously this last name is there inside the session attribute, and the session attribute will make it available to each request coming to this URL. So last name, and also I'll do what? I will accept it string last name and equal to, I will typecast this to string, and I will add this last name to the model 2. So I'll say model 2 dot, and I will add this last name here, last name, and the attribute value I'll give the last name. The first name I do not want. Think like that. If I do not have a requirement to face the first name, I only have a requirement here to face the last name in this particular method. And after, but imagine that from the second I want to call the third one. So I'll go to the index.jsp. This link I have hard coded to second. I can change it to third. Otherwise I can do one work. Let me stop this. I can create a dynamic link here. Let's say I'll go to the first controller, and here I will do what? I'll go to the first one first. This is my first one. Okay, this is the link I'm hitting at first, /first. So what I'll do here to this model dot add attribute, and let me say the value for this is next. So my next link will be /second. So I'll say /second, and here I'll also do model, what is this per second? This is model 1, right? So I'll do what? Let me say model 1 dot add attribute, and let me give the same name. What is that? Next, right? I'll say next here, and the attribute value I will give what is the third one? /third. Okay, from second I want to call the third one /third, and there you go. Okay, cool. So right here in the index.jsp, what I'm going to do here, I will not hardcore this second. I will try to fetch this dynamically. So I'll say dynamically, I'll say what is that model name I'm giving everywhere? Next, right? Copy this, come here, paste it here. Okay, there you go. Command S, and let me start the server. And if you want to print it, if you want to print this in the text also, I can say next is this one. Okay, so this link also I can see in the view. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to start my server, and I'll just save everything, and you know, we have created a dynamic link right now. From first we'll call the second, from the second we'll call the third. Amazing thing, isn't it? Okay, it's not done. It's not done yet. Okay, hold on a sec. It's reloading the changes, and reloading is completed. Okay, so let me hit first right now. Okay, so you can see when I'm hitting the first URL, I'm getting Avilas and Panigrahi here. Pretty fine. The next, right now I'll click, it will call the /second request, right? So if I'll hit next, I can again get Avilas and Panigrahi. Remember that I'm adding these two things to the model. Okay, I'm retrieving these things from the model, and right now I am going to hit the third /third. I am going to hit, right? The /third is going to do what? It is going to call this one, and here I am trying to paste the last name only, and I'm trying to add the last name to the model, right? Right now, tell me one thing. Here I'm also having first name, right? This is going to display or not? This is also going to display. Why? Because we have persisted the first name with our session attribute. So session attribute is going to make the first name available with my model object, and it is up to me that I am going to fetch it or not. Let's say I do not have any requirement here to fetch the first name, so I didn't fetch it, but the first name is available inside the request or inside the model object. And as you can see, inside the request scope, we have the first name and last name. Both these objects are available. So inside our view or inside our JSV, the first name will be retrieved and will be visible to the user, and we'll be fetching the first name from the request scope or from the model. Okay, and let me hit the third, and you can see I'm getting both Abhilash and Panigrahi right here. Cool, so there you go. So the important thing, whatever you learned right here, we are trying to access the values from the model itself, right? And that is the important thing. The Spring MVC is giving you the power to access the request attributes. Okay, even though the request scope is very small, but still Spring MVC is making sure that if you are persisting these things to the session scope, it is making you available to the model object. And this is pretty amazing. In every handler method of the same controller through the Spring MVC, if you are using @SessionAttributes, we will be having the access of the first name and last name or whatever the object will be adding to the session attributes in each of the controller. And that is the point I want to prove till now. So guys, this is called a conversational scope. Okay, you understood about the request scope, right? The request scope is just over once the request and response is done, right? You hit a request, the server gives you a response, and the scope is done. And this right now is called a conversational scope. @SessionAttributes designed to give you a feature called conversational scope. What is a conversational scope? Conversational scope means the developer has the ability to begin the scope and end the scope as his wish, right? If I want, I can decide here my scope begins and here my scope ends. I want to tell you how. See here, I have here I have my session attributes right here. So I am able to access those things right here inside the handler2 method, even though it is a new request. Let's say after I handle this request, I feel that I do not need this particular attributes anymore. So what I can do, if I want, I can use something called session status. So I'll do comma and I'll do session status probably. I'm not sure. Yeah, session status. I'll write status. And using this session status, I can end this. I can remove this object from the session scope. Okay. So what I can do here right now, you can think that these things are there in the session. Okay, so I want to remove this particular thing. When this particular /second will be get called, at that time, once this request is done, I'm going to do what? I am going to remove those things, right? So I'll do, I'll say removing the session attributes from the session scope. Okay, so I'll do what? Status.setComplete. Once I call this particular method called setComplete, all the session attributes will be removed from the session scope. So here Spring MVC is giving me a feature that you can decide whenever you want to remove those things. But I will make sure, as long as you are not calling this method setComplete, I will make sure that each time a request comes to the same controller's handling methods, I will make sure to make these variables available to each request. And if you do not want it after a particular request, you can use setComplete so that I can remove those particular attributes from the session scope. Right now, I have given setComplete after this, right? After we handle this request, I am calling setComplete. Okay, so let's see what is the behavior right now. So if I'm going to do Command S right now, okay, if I'm going to do Command S right now, actually let me restart my server, because the session is basically managed by the server. I told you in the last video, if you talk about this add session attributes, okay, it is also getting stored. All these elements we are adding to our session attribute, it is also getting stored inside the HTTP session only. But we can also change it. If I want my session attributes to store in a database, I can configure it. I can store these particular things wherever I want. I can configure it by myself, but if I do not want it, by default, it is going to be stored inside the HTTP sessions. All the session attributes are going to be stored inside the HTTP session itself. So right now, let me redeploy this and let me see the changes, what is going to happen right now. It's a pretty interesting thing, and what I want is keep practicing this thing, keep doing this thing, so that you can understand what is actually happening behind the scene. So right now, my server is started. So what I'll do here, I will go to slash first. Okay, so right now I can see Abhilash Panigrahi. Now I will call slash second. Okay, now if I call the slash second, you can see Abhilash and Panigrahi. I am able to fetch these two things from the model. So if you remember here, we have this Abhilash and Panigrahi. We are fetching it from the model, from here, and right now we are saying set complete also in this particular request, right? So what is going to happen behind the scene once you got this value right here in the page? Right now, if you are going to do refresh, you are going to lose this particular values. Why? Because you have already told to Spring MVC that or the Spring framework that, hey, once these things are done, I want to end the session scope right here with this particular request. So see what is going to happen if I do refresh. You can see right now the values are gone, and right here, if I'll go here, whenever I'm trying to log this first name and last name, you can see I am getting null. I am not able to face these things right now from the model because I have ended the conversation. Okay, a lot of request is coming to our controller, right? And Spring MVC keep pushing the session attributes to the request every time, so that the developer can have a conversation, right? And here I as a developer has the opportunity to end the conversation after slash second. Now tell me that here what is going to happen. Here I'm trying to paste the last name from the model, right? Obviously I have did the set complete in slash second. So whenever I'm right now coming to the slash third, right now I will not have a hold to my model object, and if I'm trying to find the last name from my model object, it will not be there. Okay, and also if I'll go to the index.jsp, the first name also I won't find, because I have did set complete means it is going to be removed from my request scope, and also it is going to be removed from the session scope. From my session also, okay, from my session also, all these two variables will be removed because I have called this set complete right here. Okay, so see what is going to happen. Obviously I have already lost the variable, so I'll do next. You can see there is nothing right here. Okay, and obviously here also, okay, I'm not logging anything, right? So what I can do here to get surety, what I can do, I'm adding it, and also let me log the last name, and here I can say third request, and I will say plus last name. Okay, third request, let me say fetching from model. Okay, and I'm going to log the last name. Let me do Command S right here, and right now let me stop the server and rerun it, so that we will have one last flow right here. We'll check that, and we will be very sure about these things. Okay, so my server is started right now. Let me hit the first URL /first. Okay, I got Abhilash and Panigrahi. things are working fine. Now I'm going to hit the /2nd, and here again Abhilash and Panigrahi I'm getting, and I'm also trying to log Abhilash and Panigrahi facing it from the model. And right here in the /2nd, right now, once this method is done, I am calling the setComplete. That means these two things right now will be removed from the model and also from the session. So right now, whenever I'm calling /3rd, obviously the last name I won't be getting it from this particular model object, because Spring MVC has already removed those particular objects from the session, and it won't have anything to push it to a request scope. So right now this will be giving me null, and I'll be also not getting anything in my page. So let me call /3rd, and you can see fetching from the model, the last name is null, and also there is nothing right here. Okay, so this is called a conversational scope. Okay, so conversational scope means it is a little more than the request scope, because in the request scope, once we get the response, the things are getting destroyed, the attributes are getting destroyed. But in the conversational scope, the developer, okay, it is more than the request scope. The conversational scope is more than the request scope, because here as a developer we are deciding when to begin the scope and when to end the scope by using add_session_attribute, and that is the primary purpose of the Spring framework, to provide you that particular annotation called add_session_attributes, by using what you can create a conversational scope. Okay, so right here, if I want to complete the setComplete, if I want to remove everything from here, if I'll do Command V here, and if I will take this session status from here, and if I'll paste it right here, then the Spring MVC is going to remove the first name and last name right here, because I am calling SessionStatus.setComplete right here after the third request, or inside the third request. So as a developer, I feel that, okay, these attributes I want to remove after /3rd request is getting handled. So I'm removing the session attributes right here inside /3rd. Pretty okay? Good to go? Okay, cool. So right now what I'll do, I will not remove these elements from my session, because I have one more thing to tell you guys. Okay, so let me save all these things, and right now I'll do what? I will take you to my slide again, because I want to talk about a new thing. Okay, I hope it is getting interesting, and hope you are practicing all these things. If you are not practicing, pause this video right now, and before you move to some new concept, some new thing, practice the same thing and understand whatever I said so far. Okay, so welcome to another section of this particular video, and right now we are going to talk about something new and something interesting, just like always. Okay, so right now, whatever the stuff that we have done so far, everything we are doing inside the same controller. Now my question is, can we use the session attribute? Let's say if I'm persisting the first name inside the session. Okay, so add_session_attributes is doing what? It is creating a object in the session. Okay, it is storing that object inside the HTTP session, so that we are able to access those things in a new request, just like /2nd, /3rd, or /1st. Okay, we can able to track the user input everywhere. So now my question is, can I use this first name? Okay, can I retrieve the first name value in a different controller? Okay, so you can say, obviously, Avilash, this is session, right? The session attributes just works like HTTP session. So obviously, why not we can, access this particular name inside a different controller? Obviously, we can do it. Yes, obviously we can do it, and we are going to prove it within few. But the confusion arises whenever you read the Spring documentation and whatever they have written inside that documentation. So what you need to do, you just go to internet and type @SessionAttribute Spring doc. Okay, and after that you will be getting this particular page. Click on the first URL, then you will be getting this particular page. But right now what we'll try to do, you can also pause this video right now and can read the information written here. If you do not want to browse, pause the video right now and just try to read this out. Okay, so right now, let me read this thing, read some lines right here, and let me tell you that why a lot of people get confused with this. What is Spring's thought about the @SessionAttributes? If you go with the Spring developers thought, then they are telling us always use this @SessionAttribute inside one controller only. Okay, restrict it with one controller. Do not try to fetch the value whatever you are setting with @SessionAttributes. Do not try to fetch those value in different controllers. That might be buggy. Okay, and they always want to instruct us to use the normal HTTP session instead of @SessionAttributes whenever you want to access the session objects inside different controllers. Okay, so if I will read this documentation, you can see that annotation that indicates the session attributes that a specific handler uses. Specific handler means what? Specific controller. So if you're going to read more, this is typically list the names of the model attributes which should be transparently stored in the session or some conversational storage. Okay, we understand that I have already told you that if you are going to use @SessionAttributes, this is basically going to store inside the HTTP session, and if you want, you can actually store those session attributes inside a database by doing some configuration. And obviously we haven't talked about it, but we can able to do that. Okay, using Spring framework. Cool. So right now what it is saying that if you see here, there is a note, session attributes as indicated using this annotation correspond to a specific handler's model attributes. Okay, you can mark this word, specific handlers. Okay, model attributes getting transparently stored inside a conversational session. Those attributes will be removed once the handler indicates the completion of the conversational session. And I have already told you that we can end the conversational session by using the setComplete method of session status class or interface, right? I have told you, right, SessionStatus.setComplete, and we can do that. If you are going to do that, then obviously the session attributes will be removed and we can end our conversational session. That's what it is saying. So it is saying that as we are using the @SessionAttribute inside a specific handler, we can end that by using the setComplete method. And it is saying that therefore use this facility for such conversational attributes which are supposed to be stored in the session temporarily during the course of a specific handler conversation. Okay, and if I'll keep it short, what it is saying that use the @SessionAttribute for a specific handler only. And for permanent session attributes, if you want to have some kind of permanent solution, then use the user authentication object, which is kind of part of Spring security. I'm going to tell about that later, or the traditional Session.setAttribute method instead. Okay, it is saying that do not use the @SessionAttributes because that might cause problem. I'll show you how. So instead of @SessionAttributes, if your goal is to use the session object in multiple controllers, then try to use the traditional session, means HTTP session, and you can use the setAttribute method to set the attributes and getAttributes method to get the attributes inside anywhere, inside any of the controller or any of the servlets. Obviously controllers are servless. So once you set something to the HTTP session, then we can get it at anywhere, at any controller, if we know the key, okay, the session key, whatever we are storing to the session, right? Cool. So right now, let's try to understand why Spring is saying that, and can we actually use the add session attribute in some controller, and can we actually try to capture the value, the session value or session attributes value inside some different controllers. Let me try to give you some examples right now. Okay, so let me go to the slide again, and after that, I'll go to the STS and we'll do some coding. So let me go to my slides and let me make the thing simple for you, because you guys are smart and you will catch everything in one shot. Okay, let me go to the previous slide. No, not this one. Okay, so you have seen this slide already, but let me come again from the scratch so that it will be easier for everyone to catch. So we have a request scope and a session scope. I have a controller class. Okay, this is my first controller. Right now I have a handler mapping, and I'm adding two things to my model right here, object 1 and object 2. So obviously object 1 and object 2 will be created right here inside the request scope. And I have a add session attributes, imagine, over the controller class. So this obj1, which is the object 1, will be there inside the session scope, right? Once this handler method is invoked, this obj1 and obj2 will be destroyed from the request scope, and the object 1 will be there in the session scope. So right now, imagine that we have another method, let's say class bbb. When this particular method will be invoked, then obviously this object 1 will be pushed to the request scope and will be available right here inside the M2 as a model attribute, right? And we can actually fetch it from the request scope. Cool. So right now, if you do m2.getAttributes, the obj1, we can actually access this because we have it right here inside the request scope. Cool. No problem. Now, once this BBB is done, the invocation is done, then obviously that object will go away from the request scope. This is pretty simple. So the next thing here is that, now listen to this very carefully. I have another controller class. Okay, so right now I'll do what? Let's say I have another request mapping and it is mapped to /ddd, and here also there is a model class and a model instance. And right now, if I'll try to do m3.getAttribute obj1, now what is going to happen? Okay, so you can see that here inside this controller, I have not called the set status anywhere. Sorry, complete status method anywhere. So did I call the complete status SessionStatus.complete status, that particular method right here? No. Did I call it right here inside this particular method? No. So as a developer, I haven't called that particular method, setComplete method, to remove the attribute obj1 from the session. That's why this object 1 is still there in the session. Okay. So my question is, whenever you will have a new controller right here, and whenever this particular request will be invoked, or this particular method will be called, at that time, if I'll try to access the object obj1 right here, what is going to happen? First of all, this object 1, whether Spring MVC is going to push it to the request scope. My first question is that. And the answer is no. Spring MVC right now is not going to push this object 1 to the request scope and will not make it available right here in the request scope or inside this model. So if you do m3.getAttribute.object1, then this is not possible and you will not be having that particular object right there. That's because add session attributes is designed to have a conversational session, or to have a conversational scope, or to give a feature to the developer so that they can use the conversational scope feature right here inside the Spring MVC. And that is only limited to one controller only. And after this controller, okay, if you are trying to end, or if you're trying to remove the object from here you can use setComplete, but if you do not want to do it, then obviously that particular object will be there in the session scope, but it will not be pushed to the request scope, so that you will not be get it right here inside this handler method of a different controller. And this particular statement right here, or this particular line, is going to give me null as return. So this is first point to keep this in mind, that this particular object will not be pushed to the request scope. Okay. And right now you can ask me that, hey Vilas, okay, so as you have this object inside the session already, can we okay, this is not available to the model, that's fine, but is there any other way we can have access to this object? Obviously there is another annotation called @SessionAttribute. This is @SessionAttributes, and that is @SessionAttribute. We can use that annotation right here inside this method M2. After model, we can write @SessionAttribute right there to capture that particular value. I'm going to tell you how to do that. We can explicitly use the @SessionAttribute annotation right here inside the method, inside this particular method, to capture this object one, but Spring MVC is not going to push it to the request scope automatically and will not be getting that object from this model. This is the only one point that I want you guys to understand, right? So right now let me code it, because this doesn't make sense, right, if I cannot prove it. So let me go to STS and let me do that stuff for you right now. All right, so right now we're back to STS, and right now we have this first controller, and I haven't changed anything. And you can see I have commented this status.setComplete to, I have commented this particular line, so my session attributes will be there inside the session all the time, right? Cool. So right now what I want to do, I want to go to the second controller right now. Imagine that I have another controller, and I have a handling method here, handling method 3, and there is a request mapping attached to this method called /normal method. Let's say I have a model object here inside my new controller. Model, where are you, man? Model, I cannot find it. Okay, there you go. Model, and here let's say I want to see if I can get model.get attribute, and I want to access the attribute right here from the first controller. I want to get this first name right here inside my second controller, which is a new controller. And as I told you, the Spring MVC will not automatically put the first name in my request scope, so inside the model I won't be getting that object. So let me test this out. So string first name equal to, let me typecast this to string. Okay, and once I get this, let me first do one thing. Let me first try to see this out. Let me give a log here. Let me say inside new controller method. Okay, now let me let's say printing first name. Okay, and here I'll give a space and say first name here, whatever I get. Cool. Okay, now let me see that whether I am able to retrieve the same thing from the first controller, whatever I set here, whether it is putting this particular thing to my request scope. So let my okay, one more thing, let me close this one, and here in the third whenever this particular method will be get called, let me do the same thing for the dynamic link also. I need to generate, right? So model1 dot add attributes, I'll copy that to here, and I will paste it right here. I'll say the model reference is model2 dot add attributes. Next, and what is the URL of that? The URL is normal method. Let me copy this and let me go here and let me say normal method. There you go. Let me do command S, and now let me stop the server and restart it again. So already stopped, so let me restart it, And let me see the magic, whether I am able to get my model object, the first name right here. Okay, so let it be deployed first. Cool. So initializing the dispatcher, and inside the configuration class, so I have added some formatters previously. That's why this particular log is there, doesn't matter. Now server startup completed. Now I will go to my second controller. My concern is here I should be getting null, right? Because this particular object will not be there inside the model. But tell me one thing, if I'll go to the index.jsp, whether the first name and last name value will be retrieved or not. From the model, obviously inside the controller, I won't be getting the value because this is, I'm trying to get it from the model. But right there, inside the index.jsp, you will have the value, first name and last name. Why? Because I have already told you in the slide, okay? Here, if you want to see, this object will be there inside the session scope. The first name and last name will be still there in the session scope. In the request scope, it won't be there. So we won't be getting the value from the model, but from the session, we will be getting the value, right? So if I'll go to my STS, obviously we will be getting the first name and last name value from the session because we haven't removed those particular value yet. Okay, we haven't called SessionStatus.setComplete or SessionStatus.setComplete method. We haven't called that. So we'll be getting this value right here inside the JSP. So right now, let me go here and let me first call the first. And obviously I'll be getting a Vilas Panigrahi next. Something I'm printing there from the model is giving me right here. Again, third I'm going to call, and again you can see Abhilash Panigrahi here, right? And I'm getting all this value from the model, and also I'm trying to log the things, and you can see from model Panigrahi, the last name probably I'm patching right here in the first controller, here in the third. The last name I'm patching it, okay, and also adding it, no problem. Now I will call the normal method. Okay, so obviously if I'll call the normal method, if I'll hit this URL for the second controller right here, this will be null, and in the JSP I'll be able to get this value from the session. Okay, so now let me hit this URL, and you can see Vilas and Panigrahi, and you can see right here inside new controller method, okay, and printing the first name, and the value is null. So obviously we won't be getting the value retrieved right here because this is a new controller. And add session attributes, as Spring developers has already warned us in the documentation, they said always use this, okay, always use this add session attributes for conversation scope purpose or a conversational scope purpose, right? If you want to use it as a session, well, as you can see in the index.jsp, we are still able to retrieve the value from the session because right here we are using it as a normal session attribute. So obviously that particular object is there in the session, so we'll be able to get those things. But the Spring MVC is not, making these particular things available inside the model. That's why we're getting null here. Now the question is how I am able to access the first name and last name, whatever I have set in the here, how I can access this inside a different controller. And obviously for that I can use add session attribute. Okay, so let me see that. So here what I'll do, I will write add session attribute, this particular one, and in the key I'll provide the first name right here. Copy this, paste it here, and this is obviously a string, so I'll say string first name, right? So now if you are going to print this first name, obviously you are going to get the value binded to this. whatever the value there in the session, that value will be binded to the first name. So right now, if I want to explicitly add this first name to the model, we can do model.add attribute, then first name. We can do whatever you want. Okay, so what I want to do, let me remove this. This doesn't have any meaning, so let me comment this out. Right now, what I want to do, let's say I got the first name, so I will do something. Let's say Mr. space dot first name. Let me change that first name value. So I'm fetching the first name value. I am adding Mr. to first name. Then I am creating a new string, the new first name. Okay, and now I will be adding this first name to my model. Let's say model dot add attributes. Add attribute, and right here I will give the same name, whatever I'm fetching right here. First name I'm fetching, right? So copy this, go to the second controller and give the name as first name and new first name. Okay, so here what I'm trying to do, I am trying to access that object, the first name object, to do something, right? I can do any kind of things right here, and then I am changing something, then adding the same thing to the model. And right now, let me see what is going to happen right now. So I'm dealing with the session, and session is basically stored in the server memory. So let me restart the server to make sure everything is cleaned up. Right now, I'll be creating some new session object in my server in memory. Okay, so right now, let my application gets deployed, and then I can do those things. Am I boring you? Don't tell me yes. I don't know what I'm saying. Okay, I'm just lost with all these things. I'm just thinking like I'm just coding myself. I just turned that camera on. So if you're finding it boring, I'm really sorry, guys. But yes, I should feel the satisfaction that, well, I have said everything which is there in my mind, right? I'm not a YouTuber, man. I cannot be a YouTuber. I cannot produce videos just for views and just for okay, add session attribute, write these two annotation, show you the things. I don't like those things because as long as you are not completely 100% sure about these things, you cannot work. Okay, just knowing the syntax is not everything. You have to know all the things from scratch, what is happening behind the scene. Otherwise, how you're going to fix a defect? How you're going to fix a bug if you're not going to understand all these things? Okay, sorry, I'm that kind of a person. If you are bored with me, what I can do, I'm really sorry about it. Okay, so I don't want to get emotional. now let's go to our web page, and let me hit first here. Well, I'm getting Abhilash Panigrahi. I'll go to the second. I'll be getting those things. Abhilash Panigrahi, third. Okay, still I'm able to paste those things from the model. The Panigrahi, the last name, I'm fetching it. And now I'm going to go to the normal method, and let's see what is going to happen. And you can see Mr. Abhilash. Okay, so I am able to fetch the thing from the session, then changed that name, then again added that name to the model, and here it is fetching from the model, and this one it is getting fetched from the session. Okay, so second controller, you can see also I'm trying to print the first name. So I have given the first whatever I'm trying to fetch, I'm trying to print it right here. Also you can see in the log printing the first name of Vilas. So I'm able to successfully get those things from the session. Okay, but why Spring people is telling us that not to use it, or be very very sure whenever you are using add session attribute? That's because imagine a scenario that if I'll go to the first controller, so one developer did what, he has written session attributes right here. So if you are just working on a task, you have seen that, okay, session attributes just right there. So this particular attribute will be there in the session. So you are trying to retrieve it right here inside the second controller and doing some business operation just right here. But imagine that if another developer will run this set complete method. Okay, so if he will uncomment this one. So he will think that, okay, I'm working on session, I'm putting this first name and last name to the model object, and in the same time I'm persisting this to the session, and right after that I am using those things inside the this particular method. Then I'm again using those session attribute inside this handling method 3, and after this I do not want this to be stored inside the request scope, and also I want to remove those session attributes from the session. So he simply use status.setComplete. Okay, this status, if I'll do command click, this is the session status instance, right? So those things will be removed. Right now, if another developer is trying to fetch those session attributes using the session attribute annotation, he will not be getting those things right here because that's already been removed inside the first controller. So you have to be very sure that you are doing everything right, and nowhere the things are removed from the session, because Spring people has designed the add session attribute for conversational scope purpose, to give you the feature of conversational scope, not to use it as a permanent session stuff, just like we do it with HTTP session, right? So that's why they have said there, whenever I read the documentation, it was a line there for permanent session. If you want to keep something permanently inside the session, use the normal HTTP session. Use session.setAttribute. Do not use add session attribute. So right now, let me do command S. Okay. And as I have, let me save everything. And as I have done status.setComplete, now let's see the behavior. Let me stop the server and let me start the server again, so that we can see that in the second controller in here. Okay, let me start it. In the next controller, we won't be get those value as we have removed all our session attributes from the session itself by calling the setComplete method. Okay, so let me wait till the server reload the changes, and after that I can do some research right here. Cool. So server is started right now. If I'll go to the right here, normal method. So I will do what? I will call the first one. Okay. Okay. So Vilas Panikrai, go to the second. I have these things in the session and also in the model. Next, and I have these things also in the session and also in the model so far. And next, now I can see bad request, because I have already removed it. Right now, if you have used add session attribute to fetch the thing, you won't be getting it, you will be getting exception. And this is a bad scenario, right? That's why for specific handler, remember that word, right? They advised us previously, use it for specific handler. Otherwise, do it at your own risk, right? So if by mistake you have called that method setComplete, then that will be removed and you won't be get it anywhere, right? So you can see I'm missing the session attribute first name because it's already been removed, and that's why we're getting a 400 bad request, and it is complaining right here that this one is not exist anywhere in the session scope. Hopefully at this point makes sense. Okay, so hopefully we are going good. There are still something that I want to tell you about these things. It's going to be 9 o'clock, right? I can sit a few minutes more with you because I haven't speak much today. Only 1 hour, 1.5 hour, man. I have to speak around 3-4 hours till you guys get bored and till you guys started scolding me, hey, don't speak too much. But what I can do, man, that is my characteristics, whatever that is. In this object is Avilash. Inside that property is set, and you cannot remove that. Talking. Cool. So yeah, I'm just giving you an opportunity to scold me. So you can say, dude, don't talk too much. Okay. Even people are saying that in comment section. I've seen. Obviously, he is pretty elder than me. I was reading a comment few days back, and he said, "Talk less, man. Talk less. Do more." So what I can do, sir? This is my property, and I'll definitely try to skip this thing and skip this property from myself. But yeah, let me get back to the concept. The next thing that I'm going to discuss right here is I just want to find a way how I can store something in a long-term basis, right? Let's say permanently if I want to put something in the session, right? As Spring MVC says, or Spring Boot MVC says, we do not have to use the session attribute. Try avoid that particular thing and restrict it till all your methods are there inside the same controller. But if you have different controllers, you can use that at your own risk at session attribute. But what you can do, you can use HTTP session. Okay. So let's say, let me try to do something. Let's say inside the first controller here, let's say I want to set something to my session. Imagine that this /first does have a form. I'm capturing something from the form, and I want to, whatever the data I'm capturing, I have to show that data in every page. So obviously HTTP is a stateless protocol. So once the request response is done, then obviously the request attribute will be removed. So we have to use session attribute to keep something inside the session scope for a longer time. And to do that, what I can do, I can use HTTP session, or I can use HTTP servlet request. And from that you can get the session, and then you can set the variable. So let me do HTTP servlet request directly. I could have done HTTP session, but okay, this is also good. HTTP servlet request. Let me say request. Okay. And let me say that from this request, I will get session, and it is returning HTTP session, right? I'll use the get session method right here. And right now, if I'm using this method, this is going to create a new session for me if there is no session earlier exist, right? We do not have any other session so far. So this get session method will create a new HTTP session and will give that object to us. So I'll do HTTP session right here. And let me say session equal to, and let me add something session dot set attribute, and it has a kind of map, key value pair again. So let me say what I want to store. Let's say my address. Okay, so what I can do, I can say address, and I can put some address right here. Bangalore. Okay, I miss you, Bangalore, man. My studio is there. It is pretty difficult for me to shoot here right now. I'm missing my studio, and hopefully this COVID will end pretty soon and I'll go back there. Oh, cool. So again, talking. So I have added the address to the session. So right now in the global session, in that scope, I have this object there inside the session. Now I can do what? Anywhere I can try to access those things by calling the get attribute, right? So it is the set attribute, then I can call session.getAttribute and I can use address to get that, right? So what I can do right now, first let me go to the index.jsp. Let's say after this break, I can say address, and I will get the address from my session. So I'll do what? I will go to first controller, and right here my session attribute name is address. So I'll go here and command V. Cool. So this is my address. I'll give another BR right now, right here. Okay. So I will be accessing my address right here. So what I want, let's say in this first request, I have already put the address to my session right here. I have already added that. So right now what I can do, I can, let's say in my third request here, I want to access that session object. So what I can do here, HTTP session, and I'll say session. I'll remove this HTTP, extra HTTP. And let's say right now, I want to do what? I want to get that session right here. So I can do what? Session dot get attribute, and I can give the name here. Let's say my name was address. Copy this, paste it here. Okay, so I got the hold of this particular variable. Let me store this with something. This get attribute will give me an object, right? Okay, let me typecast this to string, and let me store this inside string address equals, and right now let me change that address plus, let me add something to this. Let's say home sweet home. Home sweet home right here, and let me create a new string here. Let's say string new address, and equals this, and I'll do what? Let's say I have changed something. I get the thing from the session. I have changed something. Then again I'll try to add this thing to the model. So I'll do model2 dot set attribute. R attribute, and right here attribute name I'll give something, attribute value also I'll give something, right? So attribute value, I have already created a new address. Copy this, paste it here, and the attribute name I'll give the same because I'm retrieving in the JSP. It is address, right? Copy. Right here the attribute name is this, so I'll get something new in the third request. Okay, so I'm fetching it from the session and doing some changes right here. Let me stop this, and also I'll do what? I will copy the same line here, session.get attribute, and also let's say in the second controller also I want to access the same thing. So I'll do what? I'll say something retrieving the session attribute, okay, from http session. Okay, so I can create a http session instance right here, http session, and I can say session, and I can remove this extra http from here. So right now I can paste the same thing, and right here this address I can go to first controller. I can copy those same thing, new address right here, and here let me say something else. Intention to prove here is that in the second controller also I'm able to access the session attribute inside the controller method, right? Inside the controller method itself, I'm using session.get attribute to get the value from the session. And now let me say instead of home sweet home, let me say this time Odisha, my favorite place to live in, because this is my home. And right here I can say model, so I say model.add attribute, again address dot new address, whatever I have set right here. Cool. So let me do command S. Okay, for first of all let me do one thing. Let me comment this set complete, this thing, then we'll try to do that. Okay, then we'll try to again uncomment all these things and we'll see the flaw. Okay, so now let me go ahead and test it. The point to prove here is that I have created a HTTP session normally, and then I have set some attribute. Then in different URLs, I am keep tracking that particular session attribute, and somewhere if I have some need, I'm changing that attribute to something else, and again I'm adding the same thing to the model itself. And also in the second controller also I am doing the same thing right here. So for now what I can do here, I can go to my server and I can start my server again. Okay, and let me see that this is pretty straightforward. You can see the expected result right here, but it's good to be get confirmed once, right? So let me deploy my things to the server and let me wait till my server reload my changes. Okay, full stop. Cool. So right now my server has started. I'll go to the first again. Okay, and cool. So Avilash Panigrahi address is BLR. First time I'm setting my session address there. Then in the JSP, I'm trying to access it. When I'll go to the next /2, this particular URL, then what do you feel? This BLR will be there or not? See here in the first controller, if I'll go to the second, here nowhere I'm trying to access the session object, right? So I do not have anything right here in my method parenthesis. So right now my question is, will I see BLR, right? Whenever I'm going to click this second, because this is going to be a new request, right? So the answer is obviously the BLR will be there, because once the session object got created, it is there inside the session scope. So obviously in the index.jsp, whenever I'll try to access the address object, I will be get that from the session, because in the first controller I have already created a session right here, and I have already set this address to to my session attribute. So this will be there inside the session scope. Cool. So right now I'll go here and I'll do next. Again, I'll got BLR right here. Nothing fancy, I have already told you. Now whenever I will click the third, right here what will happen is I will go to the first controller here. In the third we are actually accessing that, then we're adding home sweet home to this. So let me go here, BLR home sweet home, no problem. Again, a normal method, new controller, it will go to the second controller, and right here we are saying Orissa. Okay, so obviously we will be getting BLR Orissa, and this is how we can access the session attributes in different controllers by using the normal HTTP session. And Spring MVC also says in its documentation that whenever you want to have some permanent kind of storage, then use the HTTP session, not the session attribute. Right now, I want to ask you some question, right? So if in the first controller, first of all, let me activate the session complete. Okay, this thing I want to activate right here. So this will remove the session attribute from the session. Now tell me one thing. Whenever I'm going to run this thing, as add session attribute is also going to be stored inside the HTTP session itself, whether my session attribute, the HTTP session attribute, my the normal one I set here, this address will go away from the session or not, right? Obviously these two attributes will go from the session because we are calling the setComplete method. So these two things will be removed from the session, but whether this thing is also going to be removed from the session or not. Okay, so first of all, let me go to the second controller, and here obviously I'll be getting an error because I have added setComplete method, so it won't find that first name and it will throw me an error. So it's better if I will remove all this code. Okay, so right now tell me whether when I'm accessing address right here from the session, will I get my session value as it is already removed right here inside the third right here. So will I get that thing right here inside my normal method right here or not? Okay, so let me test this out. Let me do Command S, let me save everything. Okay, and let me stop the server and restart it again. Okay, and right now we'll see what is going to happen. Okay, so till my server gets started, I'll tell you one thing, guys. The HTTP session and the session attributes, do not mess with these two things. Do not get messed up with these two things, right? Because obviously the session attributes, whatever we are adding, this is getting stored inside the session itself, inside the HTTP session itself. This can be changed, but by default it is getting added to HTTP session. But the way the things are getting handled for session attribute and the way the things are getting handled for HTTP session is different. They are not same. HTTP session and session attribute is not same. As of now, whatever we discussed, I think that you get some kind of clarity that it is not same, right? One is for conversational scope, one is for session scope, right? So right now the point is, obviously, once the setComplete method get called, whatever the things is there inside the session attribute, they will be removed. But whatever we have added to the HTTP session, this is not going to be removed, because with the HTTP session, we can add wide range of object. If you talk about add session attribute, we are only adding the model objects, right? If you see in the first controller here, this first name is what? This is a model object. This last name is what? This is a model object. So with this thing, we are only adding the model objects. Okay, but with the HTTP session, we can add anything, right? Not only model object, we can add any kind of object. I think you have already explored that in JSP. So this scope is very wide. We can add anything to this, but here we have some restriction right here, right? So hopefully my server is get started right now. Let me go there and let me hit first request first here. There you go. Avila Spanigrai BLR. Next, I have all these things right here. Next, I have all these things right here. But right now in the third request, this is the third request, and right now the things will be removed from the session. So if I'll do refresh right now, you can see these two things gone away. Okay, we do not have these things right here, and inside the model also this is also null. The first name value is not there. So right now SetComplete does it work. It removed the things which is there inside the add session attribute, but not the one which is there inside the normal HTTP session. That's why we are getting the address here, because this is the normal session 1. And if I'll go to the normal method, you can see these two things is not there because this is a different controller, right? The normal method is there inside the second controller. So obviously we will not get those two things right here inside this controller, the first name and last name, but whatever we had for the normal session, we got it here, right? These things didn't get removed, right? So right now you can see that on the screen right here, we do have the session object. I think this is one of the another point that you need to remember. And okay, one more thing is, guys, okay, if you want to remove this stuff also, if you want to remove let's say you want to do what? If we will go to the first controller, okay, and right here, after you did some changes with the session attribute right here, okay, you got the session attribute right here, and then you did some changes, and if you want to remove this particular thing, this address from the session, you can do it right here using the HTTP session instance, right? So this particular method does not have any relation with the HTTP session instance. If you want to do something with the HTTP session instance, you can do it by getting a hold of the HTTP session instance itself. Let's say I don't want to invalidate anything right here. Let me go to the second controller, and right here, let's say I do have a HTTP session instance right here, and after my things are done here, let's say I do not want to keep the object inside the session itself. I want to remove it from the session, because if I put objects in the session, it takes memory. It takes memory from my server. Okay, sessions are getting stored inside my server memory, my computer memory. And if I keep adding the objects to my session, obviously my server will be get heavy, right? Which is not good for performance. So let's say I have retrieved the things from the session, and right now I will do what? I will do Session.invalidate. Okay, right now this particular address will be removed from the HTTP session, right? So let me do Command S, and let me restart the server, and let me see whether the things are working fine or not, and whether my address is removed from the HTTP session or not. Okay, let me do this final thing, then we can wrap up this particular tutorial. Okay, so right now let my server get started. Okay, my server has already started here, so I'll go here and I will go to the first method, right? I'll go to /first, and I'll go to the second method. Right now nothing happens. I have all the things in my session. Third method, okay, I have changed something by catching my session attribute, And right now I'll go to the normal method. You can see BLR Odisha is there, but once the page is rendered, okay, in this method, in the normal method URL mapping, in this second controller method, I have invalidated the session. Right now, if you are going to refresh, you are going to get null right here, right? Why? Because you have removed that particular thing from the session. HTTP session is not going to throw any kind of error or exception, just like the SessionAttributes does. It's just saying me null. And why it is saying Odisha here? If I'll go to second controller, you can see right now this thing is giving me null, right? And I'm just saying null, and I'm just concatenating something and I'm adding it in the model. So null Odisha, the value will be null plus Odisha will be null Odisha, and it is going to the model. And right here in the JSP, we are trying to access the address, right? So we are getting null Odisha. So null is because we have invalidated our session and we have removed everything from the session. So that's all about HTTP session and the add session attribute. Hopefully you have enjoyed this particular session on session. I have given you a session on session. So hopefully you have enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. If you have any questions, then keep adding comments so that I can clarify your doubts. Also, you can ask me questions visiting my website, seleniumexpress.com. Also, you can go to my Facebook page, Facebook/SeleniumExpress-support, and there you can raise questions in the group, and I will give you the answer right there. And also you can, if you want, you can email me seleniumexpress@gmail.com. And yes, and also you can go to my Facebook page, Selenium Express. Selenium Express, you can search in Facebook and you'll get my Facebook page. And also if you want, you can go to my Instagram, and you can actually message me there in my Instagram. My ID is Selenium_Express. Okay, search me on Instagram as well. I'm new there. So if you want to get any upcoming information, what is the content that I'm working on, what is the content is going to be published, then you can find all those information on Instagram, right? So if you want, you can follow me right there. Cool. So this is all about the HTTP session and the add session attribute. If there is anything left, I will be covering all those things in the next video, because this video is already pretty long and I do not want to waste your time. So I'll see you in the next video. Till then, bye-bye. Take care, stay safe, and be safe in home, right? You won't get an opportunity just like this to stay with your parents, stay with your sister at your home, right? So it's a pretty good opportunity. So thanks COVID, and also COVID is pretty bad. I just hate this disease, right? It's in India right now. It's a out of control scenario, and I don't know when the things will be back to normal, but hope for the best. So take care of your family and take care of yourself. See you in the next video. Bye bye and take care.